Now in details. Court today convicted and sentenced ousted Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina to 21-year imprisonment in 3 cases lodged over alleged irregularities in allocating 30 katha plots in Rajuk New Town projects in Purvachal. Judge Mohammad Abdullah Al Mamun of Dhaka Special Judge Court 5 pronounced the judgment in absence of the convict, as she is yet to be arrested and tried in absenteeas. The court began reading the judgment at about 11:20 a.m. and concluded at about 11:40 a.m., sentencing Hasina to 7 years in each case, totaling 21 years in prison. The plot was allocated to Sheikh Hasina without any application and in a manner that exceeded the legally authorized jurisdiction, the court observed in its judgment. Senior Joint Secretary General of BNP, Advocate Ruhul Kabir Rizvi, has accused ousted Sheikh Hasina's 15-year-and-a-half rule of establishing an artificial economic system he described as Hasinonomics, alleged that it fueled a catastrophic surge in loan defaults and institutional corruption. Opportunities were created under the Sheikh Hasina regime to take out new loans without settling the old ones, Mr. Rizvi said, speaking at a memorial meeting at the National Press Club this afternoon. He claimed the country is now burdened with approximately Taka 6.5 lakh crore in default loans and argued that strong measures are needed from the new government to stabilize the economy. While steps are being taken on one front, collapse is occurring on another. The government must focus on issues like a lack of employment generation and rising unemployment. Meanwhile, in the same program, BNP senior leader Nazrul Islam Khan said their party is going to participate in the upcoming national election as part of his movement to restore democracy in the country. The government today approved the draft of the Rajuk Ordinance 2025, while Chief Advisor Professor Mohammad Yunus directed concerned authorities to create a separate authority to oversee the approval of buildings and construction works nationwide. The Council of Advisors today gave the approval to Rajuk Ordinance 2025 at its meeting at the Chief Advisor's office here, with Chief Advisor Professor Mohammad Yunus in the chair. Honorable Chief Advisor directed the Housing and Public Works Ministry to examine whether a separate authority can be created that will be responsible for approving buildings and constructions across the whole of Bangladesh. Chief Advisor's Press Secretary Shafiqul Alam said at the briefing at the Foreign Service Academy here this afternoon after the meeting. The Chief Advisor proposed creating the separate body as the Rajuk is authorized to give permission only in areas within its jurisdiction. During discussion on the Rajuk Ordinance, the Press Secretary said Professor Yunus raised serious concern over unsafe construction practices spreading across the country, including villages. Fishery and Livestock Affairs Advisor Furida Akhtar today said the government is working to achieve food self-sufficiency by conserving, developing and producing local breeds of livestock. She made the remarks after a rally brought out marking National Livestock Week 2025 at Sherebangla Nagar of Dhaka, urging the authorities concerned to reduce importing unsafe foreign animal products. The advisor said not only the government is working to meet domestic demand through local production, but also trying to create markets abroad. Later, she joined a seminar titled Challenges, Prospects and Way Forward for the Livestock Sector was held at the Puratan Trade Fair ground at the Agarga. The advisor further stressed the importance of reducing import dependency in the poultry sector, urging to minimize reliance on imported maize and soybean. The Election Commission today provided law enforcement agencies with detailed deployment plans for engaging their personnel during the upcoming national election, expected to be held in early February 2026. The Commission has provided the outline of the deployment plan. Now, the respective forces will prepare the detailed version. Whether they will deploy their teams as static, reserve or striking forces at the polling station is nearly entirely up to them. How many personnel will be deployed and for how many days? That will be determined by the Home Ministry, said EC Senior Secretary Akhtar Ahmed today. He made these remarks while briefing reporters after the Commission's meeting with the law enforcement agencies, including the armed forces, held at Nirbachan Bhavan in the city. Another earthquake jolts Dhaka. Another earthquake jolted Dhaka, Noshindi and nearby areas this afternoon, just days after 3 consecutive quakes. Rubaiyat Kabir, acting officer at the Earthquake Monitoring Center of Bangladesh Meteorological Department, said the 3.6 magnitude tremor happened at 4:15 p.m. The epicenter was in Gorashal of Noshindi, 28 kilometers northeast from BMD Seismic Center in Dhaka's Agarga, he said. With these 4 earthquakes were felt in Noshindi, Teknaf town in Cox's Bazar district experienced mild tremors after a 4.0 magnitude earthquake struck the Bay of Bengal shortly after midnight. The quake originated at 3:29 a.m. on Thursday, about 118 kilometers from Teknaf. We are taking a short break. Please stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching SATV News. Now news from abroad. A senior Hong Kong fire official said on Thursday that firefighters are trying their best to save lives despite being hindered by high temperature, collapse, scaffolding and constrained spaces as a huge fire continued to rage in an apartment complex that has killed at least 55 and left nearly 300 missing. Rescuers battled intense heat and thick smoke for more than a day after the blaze erupted as they fought to reach residents feared trapped on the upper floors of the Wang Fuk Court housing complex in the northern district of Tai Po. The 8 blocks of the tightly packed complex have 2,000 apartments home to more than 4,600 people in the financial hub struggling to overcome chronic shortages of affordable housing. On Thursday, police officers searched the building maintenance company responsible for the housing estate. Japan will have to pay a painful price if it steps out of line over Taiwan, China's defense ministry said on Thursday, responding to Japanese plans to deploy missiles on an island about 100 kilometers from Taiwan's coast. The remarks come amid the country's worst diplomatic crisis in years, after Japanese Prime Minister Shinai Takaichi said this month A hypothetical Chinese attack on Taiwan could trigger a military response from Tokyo. The People's Liberation Army has powerful capabilities and reliable means to defeat any invading enemy. If the Japanese side dares to cross the line even half a step and bring trouble upon itself, it will inevitably pay a painful price. China's Defense Ministry spokesperson said, Taiwan's democratically elected government rejects Beijing's territorial claims, saying only the island's people can decide their future. U.S. President Donald Trump on Wednesday called for his government to re-examine Afghan immigrants who entered the country during the former President Joe Biden's administration after two National Guard soldiers were shot and critically wounded in downtown Washington. The suspect was in custody after suffering gunshot wounds during the attack. This heinous assault was an act of evil, an act of hatred, an act of terror, Trump said in a pre-taped remarks from Florida, where he is spending the Thanksgiving holiday. Following Trump's remark, the U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services said late on Wednesday it had stopped processing all immigration requests related to Afghan nationals indefinitely. Trump has also ordered 500 more Guard soldiers deployed to Washington. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth told reporters, joining about 2,200 already in the city as part of the president's contentious immigration and crime crackdown targeting Democratic-led cities. Meanwhile, Donald Trump said on Wednesday that South Africa would not receive an invitation to participate in next year's G20 summit in Florida after the U.S. boycotted the Leaders Summit in Johannesburg last week. The group of 20 leaders adopted a declaration on Saturday in addressing the climate crisis and other global challenges despite U.S. objections, prompting the White House to accuse South Africa of weaponizing its leadership of the group this year. At the conclusion of the G20, South Africa refused to hand off the G20 presidency to a senior representative from our U.S. embassy who attended the closing ceremony, Trump said in a post on Truth Social. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro spoke out against sanctions and praised the perseverance of Venezuela on Wednesday amid a building up of U.S. military in the region. Maduro was speaking at a refurbished cardiology unit of the military hospital in Caracas on Wednesday, where he vowed a spur of public works project in the country. Speaking in the Dominican Republic on Wednesday, U.S. Pentagon Chief Pete Hegseth said he hoped more countries would accept U.S. military presence on their soil. The U.S. has ramped up operations in the Caribbean in recent months, including strikes against alleged drug trafficking vessels which have killed dozens. The Trump administration has repeatedly accused the Venezuelan leader of links to drug trafficking and criminal groups, which Maduro denies. Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday proposed to rearm the national contingents of collective force of CSTO with modern Russian weapons, which proved their efficiency in real combat operations. He spoke during the opening session of CSTO summit in Bishkek. Putin suggested launching the massive rearmament program in 2026 under Russian rotating presidency of CSTO, which brings together 6 post-Soviet nations including Russia, Belarus, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan and Tajikistan and Armenia. Armenia refrained from attending CSTO summit in Bishkek as Yerevan has frozen its relation with the group on the grounds that the allies failed to support Armenia in armed conflict with Azerbaijan. Next CSTO summit is scheduled in Moscow in November 2026. Israeli security forces launched what the military described as a counter-terrorism operation in the northern West Bank on Wednesday, which Palestinians say targeted the town of Tubas. Tuba's governor Ahmed al-Assad said Israeli forces backed by a helicopter that had opened fire were surrounding the city and establishing position in several neighborhoods. Al-Assad added that Israeli forces ordered those they forced to leave their homes not to return until the operation was over, which he anticipated could take several days. The Israeli army indicated in an earlier statement that the operation carried out with police and intelligence forces began early Wednesday morning. Production at Iraq's Khormor gas field, one of the largest in the Kurdistan region, was shut after a rocket attack hit a storage facility, prompting widespread power cuts, Joint Field Operator Dana Gas Dana AD said on Thursday. The attack, which did not cause any casualties and occurred late on Wednesday, was the most significant since a series of drone attacks in July hit various oil fields and slashed production from region by around 150,000 barrels per day in the same month. It was not immediately clear who was behind the latest strike. The attack had not impacted oil export and production operations in the region. The Khormor gas field provides gas supplies for regional power generation. Pope Leo began his first trip outside Italy as Catholic leader on Thursday with a visit to Turkey, where he is expected to make appeals for peace in the Middle East and urge unity among long-divided Christian churches. The first U.S. Pope chose mainly Muslim Turkey as his first overseas destination to mark the 700th anniversary of a landmark early church council there that produced the Nicene Creed still used by most of the world's Christians today. Leo, who has a crowded 3-day itinerary in Turkey before heading on to Lebanon, will be marking his first speeches in coming days overseas and will also visit sensitive cultural sites. Military officials in Guinea-Bissau said they had seized total control of the coup-prone West African country Wednesday, arresting its president, closing its borders and suspending its electoral process 3 days after general elections. Heavy gunfire rang out near the presidential palace earlier in the day, with men in military uniform taking over the main road heading to the building. In the early afternoon, General Denis N. Kanha, head of the Presidential Military Office, told journalists that a command composed of all branches of the armed forces was assuming control of the country until further notice. He read the announcement surrounded by armed soldiers. President Umaro Sissoko Embalo, who had been favored to win re-election in late Sunday's polls, was arrested and being held at General Staff Headquarters, according to a military source. A Peruvian court on Wednesday sentenced former President Martin Vizcarra to 14 years in prison after finding him guilty of taking bribes years before he took office, adding to a list of former leaders jailed for corruption. According to the verdict, Vizcarra accepted bribes from construction firms in exchange for public works contracts while serving as governor of the southern Mortigua region from 2011 to 2014. "24 girls who were abducted from a government boarding school in northwestern Nigeria last week had been released," the state governor's media aide said on Tuesday. The girls were seized on November 17th when armed men stormed their school in Kebbi Strait shortly after a military detachment left the premises. The attack triggered a wave of copycat kidnappings in Wara and Niger states, authorities said. The Kebbi state government released a photo showing 24 children. Meanwhile, on Wednesday, parents of the kidnapped children reunited with their daughters at the Kebbi State Government House. Halima Bende, Kebbi State Commissioner for Education, expressed gratitude for the girls' safe return. The release marks the latest in a series of mass abductions that have plagued Nigeria's northwest and northeast regions in recent years, where armed groups frequently target schools and communities for ransom. Death toll rises to 46 as floods and landslides were unleashed following a tropical cyclone in Indonesia's Sumatra, reported authorities on Thursday. Power outages and damaged bridges and homes have hampered rescue efforts to reach residents stuck in remote villages in the affected regions, the disaster agency said. Severe floods after a week of heavy rain have also killed at least 33 in Thailand and 2 in neighboring Malaysia, with tens of thousands of huddling in evacuation centers, some after being cut off for days by water as much as 7 feet high. Meteorologists believe current extremes of weather in Southeast Asia could stem from the interaction of 2 active systems, Typhoon Koto in the Philippines and the unusual formation of Typhoon Sendir in Malacca Strait. Before ending, go to the headlines again. Former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina sentenced to 21-year imprisonment in 3 plot scam cases. Sheikh Hasina's Hasinonomy is accountable for fatal loan defaults, corruption, says Ruhul Kobi Rizvi. And Chief Advisor directs for creating separate authority over approval of buildings and constructions nationwide. You're updated with the top stories so far here on SATV. And to know the latest news, visit www.satv.tv. Stay with SATV.